Bob Behler is the voice of the Boise State Broncos and has worked in that role since 2008, a four-time Idaho Sportscaster of the Year. Bob, great to have you back on BYU Sports Nation.
Well, it's great to be back, and it's also great to have you guys on the schedule again. Obviously, one of the highlights for Boise State every year is that matchup.
We'll start with that question, Bob. Is BYU the game for Boise State? I know Mississippi and Atlanta is awfully nice, but where does BYU fall in terms of the important games on Boise State's schedule?
Well, I mean, if you think about it, really, if the idea is to get to that one of those New Year's Six Access Bowl games, the Ole Miss and the BYU games are nice, but you got to win your league before you even get into the discussion of, what kind of record you have and whether you should be put into that position or not. But I think people like it. BYU is always good, always has a lot of marquee players. It's a home game this year. I'm sure people are going to be fired up to see the game. But Boise State's going to have its hands full in the opener with Ole Miss. Ole Miss has recruited very well. It's an SEC team to start the season, Boise State with a new coach. So I don't think they can see past the first game right now. But as far as interest goes, as far as the fans go, I think it's one of them they're most interested in. San Diego State's going to try to do something that only two other schools have ever done in history, and that's beat Boise State 3 years in a row. They're coming here, so I think that date is circled. And then Boise State lost a 1-pointer to Fresno State last year, and they're coming here too. So if you ask me the four games that are the most interesting on the schedule, I'd give you those four.
It's a new era with the brand new head coach, Brian Harsin, new head coach after Chris Petersen goes to Washington. What's the vibe like in Boise with the new regime?
The vibe is great. He's done a lot of things to, I think, energize the fan base here. He sent the entire coaching staff to hit every single high school in Idaho that plays football. Then he went out on a caravan, something that's never been done at Boise State before, to meet the public in, many of the different towns in the state of Idaho. He's assembled a tremendous staff. A lot of people compare this staff to the first staff Petersen put together. Hungry, young, great recruiters. I think people are very excited. Coach Pete was going to leave. Obviously he hasn't lost a game yet, but I think as far as fans go, this guy is a local kid, played high school football in Boise, was a backup quarterback here, a longtime assistant, and I think a better coach for having gone to Texas as offensive coordinator for 2 years, and then maybe even a better coach because he was actually a head coach last year at Arkansas State. I think there's no substitute for some actual experience.
Brian Harsin takes over a program that really over the last decade established itself as one of the sweethearts of college football. BCS bowl game winner, undefeated seasons. Now with an 8-5 season last year and Chris Petersen leaving under Harsin, is there maybe some urgency that Boise State needs to reemerge as one of the non-Power 5 powerhouses?
Yeah, I think they need to start well. I think they need to, keep themselves up there. I also think it's unfair to think that Boise State's going to go 92-12 over the next 8 years. I think. Yeah. I mean, I think if you're expecting that, then you're delusional. Taking nothing away from the 92-12. I mean, I think the Mountain West is tougher than the WAC. The non-conference schedule is stronger than it's been. I mean, this year Boise State is tangling with Ole Miss, they're tangling with BYU, and they're tangling with Louisiana. Well, I think maybe one of the teams that's going to contend for that spot in the Access Bowl. I like their chances. If they come into Boise and knock off the Broncos, I think that game is going to be one of the early games that maybe one of the most important games played in college football on September the 20th. But, no, I think that, I think Boise State's goal needs to be, number one, win the league. Because if you win the league, that sets everything else up. If you don't win the league and you're not going to be in any of these, the big New Year's Six bowls, you're probably not going to be in the top 10. You're probably not going to be doing anything. So, I think, in Boise State's case, unlike BYU that's an independent, I think every year the goal's got to be win the league.
BYU and Boise State continue I believe a 12-game series, which is, of all the series that BYU's signed up for as an independent, I love it the most. I think it's a really good game for BYU every year. What's the perception of that series in Boise against BYU every single season?
I think it's the same thing, and I think one of the things, besides playing somebody that, year in, year out is one of the better teams in the country, it's a drivable game. I called games for 25 years in the East before taking the job, as you guys mentioned, in 2008. One of the leagues I was in, our longest conference trip was like Boise State going to Utah State, which is the shortest conference trip in the Mountain West. So I think having places that fans can actually drive and see the game makes it better. And I also think one of the things that makes college football better that I think some of the Midwest and South have that the West doesn't have because of distance is, you go to a game in the SEC, there's 10,000 folks wearing the other color. And I always think that adds a lot to the atmosphere of the stadium when there's a group of people that are cheering when one team does something, and then there's a group that's cheering when the other team does something. And I think that, with it probably, I don't know, what do you think it is, about a 6-hour drive down to Provo from Boise? I mean, it's certainly doable for a weekend, and I think people like going down there, and I hope that the people at BYU like coming up here.
Bob Behler is the play-by-play voice for Boise State, has been so since 2008, joining BYU Sports Nation. We mentioned Bryan Harsin. Let's talk a little bit about Chris Petersen and his transition up to Washington. I know that he's not your guy anymore, but I feel like he will long be endeared to Boise State fans just for what he did to the program and the whole 92-12 effort. Why did Chris Petersen feel like it was now time to leave and pursue something else?
Well, I think you'd have to ask him that question. I think he'll be very successful at Washington. I think if you're asking me my opinion, I think this program fit. He talks a lot about things fitting. And I think that while USC was not a fit for him, I think this Washington program will be a fit for him in Seattle in the Northwest. I think maybe, he wanted to, the challenge of, moving to the Pac-12 would be a guess. He'd been here 8 years, and I think he was looking maybe for something new. And I think Washington upgraded by trading Sarkisian for Petersen.
Today's poll question, Twitter question for us is, who's the best non-P5 team in college football? And we've ranked the top 5. I want to get your opinion on this, Bob. Central Florida comes in at number 1. Houston, BYU, Boise State, Cincinnati. Where does Boise State fit into that, and who's the best in your opinion?
Well, I don't think it's Central Florida. I think Central Florida is going to start the year 0-2, and I think Central Florida is going to have quarterback issues. Replacing Bortles. So I think whoever's got them number 1, I think is going to be wrong.
That would be the two of us.
Okay. I think they're starting 0-2, and the season's going to go south for them the rest of the way.
Okay. Where does Boise State fit in, you think? We have them number 4.
Well, I don't know. The thing that scares me, guys, is I think the Mountain West is going to be real balanced, and I think that it's going to be tough. I think in the Conference USA, I like Houston. Did you have Houston in there?
Houston number 2, yeah.
Yeah, I like their quarterback, O'Korn. I think they're going to be good. I think Cincinnati and Houston are going to fight it out in the American Conference. I really like Louisiana, a team that Boise State is going to see. I think that Broadway, their quarterback, is extremely underrated. I think that that's a school that most people really don't know. I'm going to give you one that's going to be up in the polls. I don't know if they're the best team. I think Marshall's going to run the table in the Conference USA. Their non-conference schedule is as easy as pie.
Yeah, they play nobody.
And that's coming from a Boise State guy, right?
Well, this year the schedule's not easy as pie.
Yeah, you guys play tough teams now outside of the way. Yeah, and you go and you play Mississippi, you get that win, you're good. Marshall doesn't have the Mississippis, the BYUs on it. They've
got Akron, they've got Miami of Ohio, but I think they're going to be 12-0.
There's no way they get into the college football playoff either, right? No way. Marshall.
The playoff or the Access Bowl?
Playoff, never.
I don't think any of these teams are getting into the playoff.
Interesting. When do you see a non-P5 getting into the playoff, if at all?
I don't know that I see it because you've got 4 spots in the playoffs right now. You got 5 power conferences. I think there's going to be a huge fight every year because one of the Power 5 is going to be left out. And then a year that, say, the SEC gobbles up 2 bids and takes one away from, say, the Big Ten, I think there's going to be a lot of arguments over which team or which league gets left out. I think it's going to have to be a special circumstance. I think a non-Power 5 is going to have to run the table, be undefeated, and probably knock off 1 or 2 Power 5s, and I don't mean somebody down the line in a Power 5. They're going to have to knock off somebody like Boise State, beating Georgia that year, somebody that's going to end up as a competitor. But, hey, the deck is stacked. I mean, who would have thought that any teams were going to make the BCS games? Remember they stacked it? You had to be in the top 12. You had to be better than a conference champion from one of the other leagues. When those guys made those rules, do you think they ever thought that somebody was going to cash in? And it got cashed in quite a bit.
Right, and they've changed the game to try and almost push non-P5s out of the game. And Boise State's BYU a long time ago, one of the schools in '84 and '96 and '01 that kind of pushed the envelope. And then maybe my favorite game of all time is Boise State Oklahoma '07, of course, where a non-P5 actually did that. So it'll be interesting to see what the non-P5s can do.
And
now.
Utah, I know you guys don't like to talk about them, but they went down and dismantled that.
Right.
Dismantled Alabama that year.
Alabama.
They did it twice. Utah did it twice.
That helped in this process for sure.
But I think you're right, Bob. The word I've been using is a miracle. It will take a miracle for a non-Power 5 to get into that 14 playoff.
All right, I'll give you one this year that maybe could, but they won't because I don't think they're that good. You know, we're talking about schedules. East Carolina plays North Carolina, South Carolina, and Virginia Tech in non-conference action.
Well, you win all those, yeah.
You win all three of those. Virginia Tech is let's say Virginia Tech is the second best team in the ACC, and let's say South Carolina wins the SEC East. That case, you might get in.
And then you're still playing Central Florida, Houston, Cincinnati. I mean, they're the team that has a shot. That's a good point.
If you can beat, but guys,
they're not going to win all those.
What do they give you in Las Vegas for hitting a 12-game parlay? They give you a lot of money, right?
Yeah.
Which is basically what you're talking about. To be in a playoff of the top four, nobody in an outside Power 5 conference can even sniff it if they don't go 12-0.
You got to go. Right? You have to go undefeated.
And the best non-P5s have already been picked from. The guys that did it or would do it are in P5s for the most part.
Right. So to go undefeated, I mean, how many years? It's hard. You know, you have one game, you know, and there are good teams out there. I think this year college football, I'm not so sure we're going to have an undefeated team in any conference this year except maybe Marshall, because I don't know that there's a great team out there this year. Maybe somebody will emerge, but I think there's a lot of good teams out there this year.
Bob Behler, the voice of the Boise State Broncos, always insightful. Looking forward to the game with Boise State in October, and we wish you the best of luck in the upcoming games.
Thank you. It's a lot more fun when your team wins, isn't it?
Absolutely. Thanks, Bob.